We're going to take you on a dream vacation, an ideal itinerary visiting Greece and Egypt, with side trips to Istanbul and Ephesus. Starting out in Athens, our journey is going to take us through the Greek islands and on to Istanbul, Turkey, the fantastic city with Hagia Sophia and the markets. And then we'll complete our Greece tour and fly to Egypt, visiting SIMBEL and the markets and the great sites of LUXOR and Karnak. We'll be cruising on the Nile River for 4 days, enjoying a splendid vacation all in all. Beginning our trip in Athens, stay right in the heart of town near Plaka. You'll see the Temple of Zeus and the Roman Agora, the outdoor tables and sidewalk restaurants of Plaka. The old town of Athens are a pure delight. This is a great neighborhood for wandering. It's a pedestrian zone, and it's really could be considered the oldest continuously occupied village in Europe, considering the antiquity of Greece going back at least 2.5, maybe 3,000 years. There's a map of Plaka showing the layout. It's a small section of town, the old historic area. Staying at a hotel nearby, the Royal Olympic is a great spot to stay. You'll love the shops. You'll love the downtown of Athens as well. The city has really blossomed in recent years. The restaurants are wonderful. The outdoor ambiance is very friendly. There's the flea market at Monastiraki. You want to see the Olympic Stadium and, of course, the Parthenon up on the Acropolis. This is the key highlight of any visit to Athens, as well as the new museum recently opened. You'd be sure to walk through the Agora, the ancient center of Athens that was the center of town back 2,500 years ago. Plato and Aristotle walked over these grounds. It was the marketplace. It was the judicial area. It was the social gathering spot, the heart of town, and it's still there, preserved very nicely as the ancient Agora, a beautiful outdoor park with nicely preserved ruins and a terrific museum as well, the Stoa of Attalus. The best museum in Greece is the National Museum of History. It's a fantastic archaeological collection of statues, bronze, gold, jewelry, artifacts, tools, weapons, all things Greek, from the classical, from the archaic, from the ancient history of this great land. And then from the museum, you can walk right back into downtown. It's a lovely stroll. You'll go into the old food market hall, check out all these olives, the fish markets, get a plate of souvlaki or some fresh fruits to go. And a great way to cap off your visit is up the funicular to the top of Lykabitos Hill for this splendid panorama view. Then we're on board our ship to begin a 7-day cruise of the Greek islands, including a visit to Istanbul and Ephesus. Very comfortable ship. We're on the Lewis Cruise Lines on their flagship, the Crystal. Of course, meals are included when you're on board the tour. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, comfortable lounges. And the next day we arrive at Istanbul, pulling right into the heart of town in our ship. We'll have a couple of days planned touring activities here in this historical center of Turkey. The Ottoman Empire ruled for 400 years from Istanbul. We'll be visiting the Grand Bazaar and the Spice Market. The Grand Bazaar is a huge indoor shopping mall. It dates back many centuries, and the streets around it are equally lively. Get a chance to buy some souvenirs or some clothing, perhaps. A real bargain in Turkey. Grab a snack while you're on the road, some Turkish delight. İstiklal Caddesi is the main pedestrian street of the city, and look how popular it gets. A typical weekend night, thousands of locals out for a stroll on İstiklal Caddesi and the nearby streets. There's an old-fashioned tram that runs right down the middle of the street. No cars allowed on that main boulevard, and many of the side streets are largely for pedestrians as well. Lots of mosques and old houses. There's Topkapi Palace, the home of the sultans for centuries. That's a must visit when you're in Istanbul. Stroll through the grounds. The old fortified wall around the city protecting it from invaders. The Hippodrome. And the Blue Mosque, one of the greatest structures in town, dating back to the early Ottoman times in the 15th century, 16th century. And Hagia Sophia, 1,000 years earlier than that, built around 500 by Justinian, the Roman emperor. One of the most remarkable buildings in world history. On to the island of Mykonos in our cruise, arriving in the afternoon. Plenty of time to stroll through this whitewashed cubic village, Paraportiani Church, and on into the evening. Ship doesn't sail till midnight, so take your time. The shops are open. Restaurants are open as well. You could have dinner back on board or choose to eat local style at one of the outdoor taverners by the seaside. A real splendid experience, or just grab a gyros, inexpensive sandwich here in Mykonos town. Next day we visit Patmos in the morning, and here you want to go through the village. It's a very charming little seaside village, typical of the Greek islands. Do some shopping around, buy some postcards maybe, have a coffee, relax, and have a drink. But the main reason to visit Patmos is to go up and see the Monastery of St. John. It's up on the hill at the top of the island. It's a spectacular sight. Dates back to the 14th century in the Greek Byzantine style. Original frescoes, a marvelous experience. It's like a fortification around this ancient monastery with the old village around it. And the Cave of the Apocalypse, where St. John wrote the book of the Apocalypse. Take a stroll in the little village, the Cora, and then down back to the seaside village for some final moments enjoying the tranquil beauties of that charming whitewashed town. Cruising on to Kuşadası in Turkey to the great site of Ephesus. This was a site built by the Greeks, by the Romans, by others, by the Turks, and it's got layers of history, a huge amphitheater. Ephesus is truly one of the most important classical archaeological sites in the world. Original mosaic pavements still preserved in place, and the town itself is really quite charming, Kuşadası. Once you get into the little local lanes, it's a great spot. There's pedestrian side alleys. There's all sorts of local goods for sale here. Perhaps buy some leather goods or especially some carpets. Of course, the Turks are famous for their high-quality carpets as well as their fabrics. Cruising on. Next morning we arrive in the island of Rhodes and the old town of Rhodes. This is a remarkably well-preserved historic site with an ancient wall around it. Old stone structures held together by these arches to stabilize them over the centuries. The Street of the Knights is one of the best preserved medieval roads. And this is like a time capsule walking back in history on the island of Rhodes. It's a popular spot. Lots of people out and about. But when you get into those little side lanes, you've got it all to yourself. The main square is a fun spot for a meal or a snack, a pizza, or just a drink perhaps. Here's the slice of the ancient walls that go around Rhodes, one of the most fortified cities from the 1500s. The Knights of St. John built up these huge walls that go around the city, protecting it from invasion by the Turks. Fortified gates as well. We'll have a whole day in Rhodes to thoroughly explore this really wonderful historic city. There's also a museum here that's well worth your time, especially to see the Aphrodite, one of the most beautiful classical Greek statues ever found. And back into those narrow alleys, check out the local folks doing their daily shoppings. There's a number of mosques that you can appreciate here as well. Wine shops, bars, cafes, terraces. There's a new town with a new marketplace and a bit of a modern downtown that's worth a look as well. All in all, this will be one of the highlights of your visit. Then the next day on to Crete and the Palace of Knossos. This is a classical palace of the Minoan Empire. It is the oldest known road in Europe there. Dates back to early 700 BC. We're back in prehistory now. It's one of the earliest great palaces ever constructed in the world. And then on to Santorini, the final island of the Greek cruise, one of the most fabled of all the Greek islands. Its whitewashed village perched up on top of the rim of an old volcano. We get a great view from the landing of the funicular here, and you can stroll through the village. Of course, there's a lot of shops. There's souvenirs for sale throughout Santorini and many cafes with a panorama view. There's several lanes that wind through this village, so by all means, take a stroll. It's all pedestrian up here in the old Kora, and twilight is wonderful time to be up here. The ship doesn't sail till later in the evening, so you'll have a chance to enjoy a splendid sunset. One of the most famous aspects of Santorini, the view of the sunset and the departing cruise ships as we continue on our way, and we will be shortly returning back to Athens after a final breakfast on board the ship. Very nice accommodations on the Lewis Cruise Lines. You can stroll around the decks, of course. There's customer service to take care of your needs. Dinner, lunch, all served on board. Some of it's freestyle dining. You can eat when you want. Some of it you eat together. And then there's evening entertainment every night on board this ship. It's really a lot of fun. They keep you very satisfied. And then arriving back in Athens at Piraeus, we continue our ground tour of Greece with a 4-day classical tour going to Delphi for starters. This is one of the great historic sites from ancient Greece. Temple of Apollo, the theater with one of the most splendid views in all of the Greek islands. This view alone is worth the drive out to Delphi. And then you can walk through the site. There's different columns and platforms, and there's the treasuries where the actual gold and valuables were kept in the ancient times. There's the stadium up on top of the site, and a lovely museum. There's the charioteer in bronze, and splendid views looking down into the chasm of Delphi itself. The town is another charmer. Very worth walking through when you're here in Delphi. Don't just go to the site. Be sure to enjoy the town. Here's our Hotel Amalia right next to the village, so it's really easy access for us to have a meal and then just take a stroll into that little town. You walk up and down the 2 main lanes, then do a little bit of shopping, look at more of the carpets, and across the new cable stay bridge into the Peloponnese Peninsula visiting Olympia. Day 2 of our classical ground tour. This, of course, is the home of the Olympic Games that were started about 2,700 years ago, long time ago, and the columns are still here. The practice fields are here, the stadium is still there, and there's another nice small museum to go with the site. And of course, there are shops nearby. The town of Olympia is another nice spot for walking. It's just about a half a mile long, one straight road with shops and trees lining it, especially charming at twilight. Stores are open. It's mostly a pedestrian zone, so be sure to visit Olympia Village as well. Next day on to Mycenae. There's a beehive tomb that was built into the hillside. The fortified palace of Mycenae is one of the great historic sites. It dates back to about the same period as Knossos in Crete, 2,700 years ago, and still standing. The theater of Epidaurus. And on to Nafplion, another charming seaside village. For a while it was actually the capital of Greece, and really one of the nicest towns in the country. The Palamidi Fortress up top, built by the Venetians, and our hotel, also right in the heart of the old town, Very comfortable accommodations. And Nafleon's got several pedestrian streets and small squares and pastel-colored buildings with balconies and the arbors and the vines growing out front. A lot of staircases on the hillsides if you like to go do some climbing in Nafleon. Outdoor dining at these beautiful restaurants. Great spot to be at twilight. Next day on to Corinth, visiting the ancient site. There was a very important town there, occupied and built by the Romans and the Greeks. Now there's this canal that cuts through, built about a century ago. On to Egypt for the grand finale and climax of our visit. The great city of Cairo is our starting point. We stay at the Ramses Hilton Hotel, a 5-star deluxe property. Fantastic breakfast buffets. Take a stroll in downtown Cairo. You don't want to miss this. The busy market streets are really one of the highlights. Of course, you've come to see the pyramids and the ancient history, but the contemporary life of Cairo is equally fascinating. The Khan el-Khalili is one of the great outdoor bazaars of the world. Goes for many blocks. The downtown is often overlooked by tourists, but it's well worth walking through. The traffic gets a little crazy, but the people are friendly. And as long as you stay on the sidewalks, you'll be just fine. Their cars will not get you. And a lot of the lanes are just for pedestrians. Back in the Khan el-Khalili, you'll find all these colorful clothes and very low prices. The dollar goes a long way in Egypt. Great spot to visit. Evening entertainment on board a ship on the Nile. They've got these terrific Nile dinner cruises that are worth it. On to the Egyptian Museum, another highlight of Egypt. In Cairo, this has got a great collection of the ancient Egyptian artifacts, especially the treasures of King Tut. And there's stone statues from millennia ago. The pyramids, the greatest monument from the ancient world. The only one of the original 7 great wonders of the world still standing. And you can take a camel ride while you're there with help from your local guide so that you don't get charged too much. It's really a lot of fun. And on to the Sphinx. And then we fly down to the southern part of Egypt to Abu Simbel to begin our explorations of the Nile area, a great temple built for Ramses II about 2,800 years ago. This was rescued from the floodwaters caused by the Aswan Dam and raised up to this level, and you can now walk inside the temple. It's actually a air-conditioned Egyptian temple, thanks to modern technology that rescued it, with incredible statues of the gods inside and the pharaoh, the 4 big statues of Ramses II out front. He was a living god to the people of Egypt, one of the greatest pharaohs of all time, and a temple to his wife Nefertari next door. Aswan is a great city to begin the Nile cruise. We'll be seeing the obelisk quarry here and the great unfinished obelisk. This is where nearly all of the obelisks came from. The Aswan High Dam has created Lake Aswan and generates electricity for the entire country. On to the Temple of Philae, now on an island in the lake. And we begin our Nile cruise. This is a great way to see Egypt. You spend 4 days cruising the Nile, and these ships are very comfortable. You have outdoor dining, indoor dining, the terraces, and then the rowboats come up to the ship offering their inexpensive clothing. The cabins are really comfortable and friendly staff helping you out. It's always a pleasure, and it's so convenient when you're cruising the Nile because you get to have all of your meals included. Your guide is right there with you, and the temple sites are a short bus ride away on the shore excursions, like Edfu. It takes about 10 minutes to get from the ship to Edfu Temple, one of the best preserved of all the Egyptian, Greco-Egyptian temples, built during the time of the Ptolemies, back about 2,500 years ago. Amazingly well preserved. It seems like an ancient Egyptian priest could walk in today and begin doing services. Everything is still there. Kamombo, another beautifully preserved temple. It was a dual temple to the alligator god, and their original painted columns are still showing their colors. Quite remarkable after 2,500 years. And there's a little village next to Kamombo. Do a little shopping. And then to our final destination of the tour, Luxor, the ancient capital of Egypt. Visiting the Valley of the Kings, you can walk inside about a half a dozen of the tombs and see the original paintings and the original sarcophagi, the tombs of the pharaohs. Of course, the treasures were stolen a long time ago, but the painted walls are still there. Many of the original colors are still shining through. On to the temple of Queen Hatshepsut and to an alabaster shop, one of the specialties of the Luxor area. And finally visiting Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple. Karnak is reputedly the largest religious structure in the world. And you want to walk through, especially explore the hypostyle hall with its huge columns and the reflecting lake and all of the other parts of this Karnak temple. And then take a break and go shopping in the Luxor market. There's the local market, kind of a dirt road and a market especially for local people, and visitors are welcome. And then there's the tourist market, an extension of the same street with nice paving, friendly vendors, lots of good things for sale. You've got to do some bargaining here. Don't ever pay the list price. It's all part of the fun and games. And our last stop on the tour is the great temple at Luxor. Again, Ramses II out front, some obelisks. Truly an amazing monument to the great history of the people of Egypt. Wrapping up our tour of Greece, Turkey, and Egypt.